Jay, welcome to Constituting America's Constitutional Chats. As I mentioned, we're talking today about the interview that you did with Janine, American's mission statement, and we're going to ask if you'll make a few opening comments on that, and then we'll go to questions.
Very good. Well, thank you, Kathy, and thank you, Janine, and everybody on the Constituting America team. It's always a thrill to be with you, and I have to say, it's one of the pleasures of my life to be able to be involved with an organization that does such wonderful things. So congratulations on your 250th podcast. That's amazing, and it's just great to see. Yeah, and I had a fabulous time also with Janine doing that interview, and it was wonderful to be able to go over the essay that I was asked to write and did write for that project. And I'll just introduce that a little bit now, and then hopefully we can have a nice discussion about it, because I think it was really an important project defining what it really does mean, why the United States is an exceptional nation. And the discussion we had in the essay I put together really focused on that. Before I do that, I'd like to just take a quick step back and say why I had that context that I wanted to put it in. You mentioned that I was a military officer, and I was for some good long period of time, and then in business. And in both of those endeavors, the importance of the mission and the vision that leaders provide to those organizations cannot be understated. In the military, in order to have unity of action, the commander must give his intent. He must give the mission. It must be clear, and everybody must know it. And of course, in business, we spent a ton of time looking at vision of the organization. Where are we headed? And how are we going to get there? The mission, and then the goals that went along with that. I like to say oftentimes that no CEO gets to be CEO by saying where his organization is now. He gets to be CEO. He or she gets to be CEO by providing a vision of where their organization is headed. And so that's how I looked at this idea of American exceptionalism, because I truly believe deep in my heart that the American vision and mission that was articulated in our founding documents is one of the key reasons for our success. The Declaration of Independence, and especially the Constitution and the preamble to the Constitution, serve as an amazing inspirational and aspirational vision and mission statements for our country, and more than that. And that gets to the idea of American exceptionalism. Exceptionalism means different in a positive way. And that vision has spread throughout the world. And that is exceptional. And there's no way to argue against that, in my view. And the preamble also led to a very practical document that also acknowledged the idea that we would have to improve over time, that we were going to form a more perfect union. We were not perfect. We would form a more perfect union, and laid out how we were going to try to get there. So that was such an important thing for the entire world, and certainly the liberty of people here. I contrasted that in the essay with the Communist Manifesto, and I don't claim to be some great expert on the Communist Manifesto, but I did read it, and I would recommend that people do that. It's not a long document, only 12,000 words. It was written in 1848, and it laid that same kind of mission. Manifesto is that. It's a mission and our goals and a call to action. Same kind of mission that resulted in communist countries selecting that as the underlying context for their country, in contrast to the United States. And what I found in that vision and mission, that's why it's contrasting, is a very dark document that failed to do those aspirational and inspirational things that were accomplished by our founders in the American founding documents. And instead of putting forth a vision of unity, of commitment to liberty, of individual sovereignty, and a positive vision of how people could work together towards a shared goal, it established a very much we versus they, violent state power concept that underlied the entire manifesto. And I think the results are manifest. The United States founding documents spread liberty, freedom, affluence, and opportunity across the world. And the communist doctrine, everywhere it's been implemented, has spread violence, subjugation, economic ruin, and worst of all, death to 100 million people. So I think that if we get to talk to that today, that's really what I found to be the most motivating thing of comparing those two sets of documents. And certainly the results are very, very, very clear. So I look forward to your questions. I look forward to talking to that more. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we're going to turn over to Janine. And Janine, if you wanted any time for us to show a couple of clips from the interview or show the YouTube page where people can find the whole series, just let us know and Jordan will pull them right up.
Okay. Can you hear me? I was
Yes.
muted. Live Zooms. I think that it would be fun to show a clip, actually. And Jay, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I want everyone to know Jay is the most exceptional board member on the planet. He's consistent. He is calm. He has great ideas, intellect, vision, patience, follow through, all of those things, Jay. We're really blessed to have you on our board. And I want to thank you very much for that. I want everyone who's listening to know how fabulous he is. And then secondly, I loved our interview. I thought, wow. And I don't usually do this with the interviews, but I had them cut 5 or 6 clips out of the interview because I thought it was exceptional, huh? No pun intended. What you were saying, but not how you phrased it. It made such sense. And so I think a clip would be fun. It might be redundant to what I'm going to ask. It would be fun probably to show maybe the smallest clip, but let's talk about the mission statement. I think that the mission statement for America, you were talking about, of course, is our preamble, which for everyone who's listening, that was not what they constructed at the Constitutional Convention, which was technically not the Constitutional Convention, is what we call it now, but it's the convention where they were writing the Constitution. That was written by Gouverneur Morris, who kind of summarized what was in this document. But it's pretty brilliant if you think about it. And there is a mantra today, Jay, that says America's horrible, America's terrible. We were founded in an incorrect way. And we did do a lot of things that were not living up to what the document promised. I think everyone agrees with that. But I loved how you talked about the fact that it was a mission statement. And I always talk about like a foundation. It's the foundation of a house. And then we, the people, get to build it with amendments and whatnot. They laid the foundation for us. But you put it in terms of, it says a more perfect union, not that we were a perfect union. So for all those rising generations who've been embedded in their minds that we're just a horrible country because we did a lot of things wrong, which can't we all deal with that in our own lives every day? Wait, I didn't behave perfectly today. I'd hate to live up to these judgments. You want to talk about that a little bit? I loved how you say it's a more perfect union.
Sure. I think that that's really the essential element of a vision statement. It's about where you're headed. And you use the term, and we all use the term American exceptionalism, and people push back on that, as you said, because we weren't perfect then. And certainly we had lots of issues. And we talked about that in the interview. We had slavery, of course, with rights for women, treatment of indigenous populations, and more and more. And you can go on. But I think people need to remember a few things. One, the definition of exceptionalism is not perfect. It doesn't mean we're superior and better than everybody else or every other nation. It means we were different. We were different in a positive context. That's what exceptionalism means. And we were different because we had a vision and a mission to create a more perfect union. There was no claim at the time by the founders, maybe one and two individually at some point, I don't know, but officially no claim by the founders that we were a perfect union. And that was reflected in our mission statement. All the different elements of the society were laid out perfectly in the preamble. I think it's very interesting that, at least when I was young, and I hope it's still true today, children are asked to memorize the preamble to the Constitution. And the reason that's so important to our society is because that is the essential mission of our society. That's what we're creating. I love the phrase to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. You couldn't ask for a more perfect vision statement than that right there. But then the preamble also says this is how we're going to do it. We're going to provide for the common defense. We're going to promote the general welfare. It says how we're going to do these things. And that really took us along the lines of creating, as we say, a more perfect union over time. So we're a very much different nation today than we were back then. And the world is a much different world now than it was back then. As exceptional as we were back then, the world has come along that same path.
So true. We set the example, there's a little bit, there's a difference between the Magna Carta and our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, but that's a whole nother subject. But they, they had gave us a lot of great forethought, of course, in Great Britain. But another thing I'd like to touch on before my time is up is, and maybe we'll play a 30-second clip just so people can see it. And Kathy, maybe you can tell people how they find it, right? But the difference between the Communist Manifesto and the Declaration of Independence and our preamble, I think one of the major factors that we discussed in our fabulous interview, which I had so much fun, is that they believed in that. Okay, it's so funny because on the one hand, shall I say, our founding fathers said men are not angels. Like, we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes, which is why we need checks and balances, right? But we still believe in the people. Whereas the Communist Manifesto was like, we believe in the state, we believe in the government, and the people are dispensable, actually, for the major vision of this commune, so to speak. You want to talk about that juxtaposition a little bit between America and communism?
Yes, one of the biggest exceptional things of the United States founding was this revolutionary idea, at least as it would spread across a large society, that we were individually sovereign, that every person was endowed by their creator. They're a child of God, a creature of God, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights that could not be taken away by the government or by anybody else. We were individually sovereign, and we were coming together to form a union. That respect for the individual and the beauty and bounty that's in each of us was essential for our concept of a society, and it's reflected in our documents. As you mentioned, that is definitely not in the Communist Manifesto. I called out in my essay really 4 main areas where it was so evident, and I even pulled a few quotes from that here. But first of all, there was no equality among men in the Communist Manifesto. It was us, the proletariat, against them, the bourgeoisie. And we were the good guys, and they're the bad guys, and we have to destroy them. And so there was no equality of that. There was a utopian equality. And I think it's important people understand utopian comes from the Greek, no place. It's fake. I mean, there's no such thing. So there was an utopian equality maybe, but no equality among men. There was no commitment to individual liberty. People would be sacrificed for the state, and that was acknowledged in the document. Certainly no unity. And as you mentioned, absolute state power. It said right here, right in the document, that the change would be, quote, effected by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property. And what they meant was they were going to take people's property by force. Violence was necessary. To centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state and the proletariat organized as the ruling class. I mean, that was just not a document that would give you confidence that you were going to inspire individual liberty and freedom.
Well said. Well said. Whereas in America, we were striving for it, but the ultimate goal was that we see all human beings as endowed by God with their rights. And it's very dark, the Communist Manifesto. And I think he was very depressed, right? And very, very, very poor. And he was in Germany when he wrote it.
Yeah, Marx and Friedrich Engels were both German. Marx was, and his personality has been examined at length. He was a very depressed, very dark person, very unsuccessful philosopher, and pretty much felt like he should have been a lot more successful than society was letting him be. So there was a lot of resentment there, which also comes out in the document. You can read it right in. It's just resentment from beginning to end. But Engels is interesting too, because his family was fairly wealthy, and they had a cotton firm, or what we would call like a factory operation. And he got to see a lot of the abuses that were actually true in that time period, in the 1840s, early 1850s, when the society was changing. It was changing from an agricultural society to an industrial society. And there's no doubt there was abuse of workers, and there was bad working conditions, and all that subjugation was true. But as many people have said, the document was really oriented for just that specific time frame. It was very dark because their experiences were very dark. But it's not like our documents, which are timeless. I mean, our Constitution has survived for 200 and what is now almost 50 years. And it's an amazing document that will probably, I hope, I pray, last for a lot longer than that. So that's the darkness that was in the Communist Manifesto, was associated with that time period and those two people.
Yeah, I think one of those reasons would be that they eliminated higher power, creator, and that they didn't want anybody to really aspire, right, to follow their dreams. They wanted everybody just to sort of conform to what everybody else did. And I think that goes against human nature, wouldn't you say?
Yes, and there was this idea that they were going to create a side of the utopian equality, but in the meantime, they were appointing themselves as the vanguard of the proletariat. They were going to be the ones to get there, and they were going to crush everybody along the way, was basically the concept. So yeah, that's a much different vision than what we had, and no real acknowledgement of anything that could be higher than the state. They had to be the highest power. So it had to be an atheistic state. And they had to, even the family had to be sacrificed. Everything had to be sacrificed for the endeavors of the state.
Well, that's a great point, and I need to toss here, but that's a great point, and that the highest power was the government.
Absolutely.
Not a higher power, not a creator, but the government, and that the government was going to have the ultimate say. And I think that's where our founders said men are not angels, and we need to be careful of the power that men may want to how they may want to smother with their power. It was power, but whereas they were saying we are the power, only we, but we are the power. And that's dictatorship is really what that is. So their whole principles, I mean, there are concepts that were okay, but I mean, the overarching principles are wrong. And I just want to close with this. What I think is also why our Constitution has lasted so long was the amendment process.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. I would have loved to have been in that room and heard who came up with the idea for the amendment process, because we have 27 amendments and they're vast and they've spanned 200 some odd years. And we can't forget how important that is because it's long lasting. But in closing, you want to talk about that we have the amendment process to see the Communist Manifesto. Of course, it was more like our declaration, but it really didn't have an amendment process, so to speak. We opened it up to say, okay, we're going to create this more perfect union. And in order to make it more perfect, we're going to give it to we the people who have a creator. We're going to honor that. And they can have some say in this document.
Yeah, well, you've mentioned Madison in Federalist 51 a couple of times, that men were angels. And in the end of that, the government needs to learn to govern itself to prevent absolute power. The Communist Manifesto wanted absolute power to be implemented initially, at least initially, so that they could crush the bourgeoisie. Whereas we said, we are to govern ourselves. And that was the checks and balances and the amendment process that we put into the Constitution, which is, as you say, that's what's helped us last. Society's changed, the world has changed. We've learned new things. It's progress, not perfection. We make progress. We didn't seek initial perfection.
Right. Progress, not perfection. Yes, exactly. Okay. Thank you, Jay. I want to give our fabulous panel here the opportunity to speak with you as well. So I'm going to toss.
Great to see you, Janine.
Thank you. Good to see you, Jay.
And Janine, before we go to Jewel and Wyatt, I thought maybe we'd have Jorn pull up and show the audience how they can find your talk show, which is getting really great numbers on YouTube. I think we're up to 1.5 million views of the episode so far. So if you go on the constitutingamerica.org website, and then Jorn, just scroll down a little bit. And there it is right there, our new talk show. And Jordan, why don't you click on watch on YouTube, and we'll show the audience. You just click watch on YouTube, and then you have access to all the episodes that we published so far. And there's some really great ones on there. And Jay's, I believe, is number 11, the most recent one that we published. And we encourage everybody to watch it. It's also, if you want to go back out, Jorn, we can show the audience that it's also available on Apple. If you hit the listen on Apple button, you can see that you can find it on Apple, and you can also find it on Spotify. It may take a second for Apple to load, but we also have it on Roku. If you have Roku at home, you can just search Constituting America on your Roku device, and it'll pop right up. So you can watch it there as well. So, Jewel, we're going to go ahead and jump to you now. Thank you, Jorn, for showing that.
All right. Hello, Jay. Thank you for being on, and thank you for everything that you do for the organization. Of course, the organization's meant so much to me, and we get to see all the amazing things that we've done in people's lives, and hopefully the positive effect on the country that we've had. So really appreciate you coming on. And I enjoyed your essay very much. It was a perfect segue, because I wanted to talk about was the line of Madison's, I believe, about the first part, if men were angels, then they'd need no government. There's so many implications. There's so much philosophy, principles, theology wrapped up in that statement, and it gets it all across so fast, such a punchy way. But it also can almost glaze over really everything that then he's saying. So first half of that statement, if men were angels and they need no government, it's interesting because it establishes that the founders in Madison, in this case, is looking for the best way to govern society. Not necessarily that he just wants it this way or wants to justify democracy or republicanism or monarchy. He's actually looking for how men have the most freedom, the most ability to pursue virtue, etc. And that's wrapped up also in that statement. I think it's interesting because, to me, and I want your opinion on this part of it, to me, reading what you wrote about the manifesto and reading that first half of that statement, it looks like Marx has an end that he wants, and he wants to justify communism, and his quotes serve that purpose. Whereas Madison looks like he's looking at the evidence and trying to come up with a system of government that responds to these truths that he's uncovered. What's your take on that? Would you agree?
Yeah. Yes, it's a great way to lay that out. I appreciate that. And it's good to see you, by the way, again. So if in the statement, if men were angels, you would need no government, is the acknowledgement that we're not angels. Okay. And that really separates two different ways of viewing humans. We are either perfect, and then society makes us bad, or we are imperfect, and we create societies to improve us along the route. The US obviously has taken the second tack. Marx had a different view, that it was society that was destroying humanity, and we needed to get rid of it. That's the utopian notion. So yes, he wanted communism, which in his mind was this utopian future where the state would melt away, there would be no property, and people would, as the Soviet constitution says, they would get what they needed and they would give what they had. And I forget the exact phrase, but to each is according to his needs, from each according to their abilities, I think. So yeah, that's much different vision than acknowledging that we're not perfect beings. We have faith in God. We have a higher power than us. We're not trying to create a utopia. We're trying to progress as a people. And the government should be set up, as you say now. Madison was interested, well, okay, well then how do we set up a government that works in that context? Whereas Marx was, how do we force people to stop being individuals until we can reach utopia? And his answer to that was by force and subjugation. where our answer was, with three branches of government, checks and balances, and an amendment process, et cetera. So, that and individual liberty, of course, that very, very different view of human nature.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Oh, that was a great way to, the things you just mentioned brought me perfectly to the next point, which is that when he says then the next piece of it, which was if men could be governed by angels, then we'd be great. Everything would be perfect too. Is another huge acknowledgement that's saying that we don't hate authority. We recognize good authority, but then recognizes that when men get authority, they tend to be corrupt and be corrupt with that authority. Um, in modern times, we don't seem to, the second half of that statement, we don't flesh that much in our political discourse, if ever. We also don't teach, I don't think, besides when Constituting America is doing its constitutional workshops, I don't know how much in civics education that concept is fleshed out to see that that's why our government is structured this way. So what I think is interesting about that statement is that the founders did have different opinions. Some of them really believed, it seemed like firmly deep down, that, there was something wrong with monarchy. But then others seem like their main idea was that even if there may have been something wrong or not wrong with the idea of monarchy, that we can't establish a monarchy here because it's going to be corrupt, et cetera. So it's like you saw some more philosophical and some more practical come down on either side of that, which is, again, seemingly different from what Marx did when he just kind of, what you just said, let's force people to do this so we can get to utopia. So on the second half of that statement, there is a danger, though, that I do see sometimes come up even with, we respect our institutions. But in the second half of that statement, it acknowledges that our institutions are what then we do have to check their corruption or their tendency to corruption. And we need both halves, I guess, the first half and the second half of that statement. So we do want to trust our institutions, but there has to be some skepticism of them as well. I just want you to tell me what you think about that. Do you agree? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think one of the things that we tend to forget when we talk about the government, we often do in the United States, I'm sure everywhere else, we talk about the government. And we forget that government, that's people. Those are citizens like you and me who have positions that we've entrusted them with certain levels of power over our lives because we need to have some type of governance so that our society can function well. But they're people. And what our documents acknowledge is that they are people, they're fallible, and they have a tendency towards abuse. So we have checks on that power. The powers of the federal government especially are enumerated and few. And so we say, this is what the federal government has power to do vis-a-vis the society. And then that's it. And we have ways to check it. So when it expands beyond those constitutional powers and prerogatives, we can stop them either through the other branches of government or by the people themselves. One of the big mistakes, and there's a lot of one, in communist societies, such as the Soviet Union, which adopted the Communist Manifesto in 1917 in their revolution, is that the people, that was not that same acknowledgement. Absolute power in the government means that there will be people who have absolute power over everybody else. And if they are abusive, which they are prone to be, then they will subjugate. It's great in theory, communism. I don't even agree with that. It's not. Because the idea to this group of people, and they're going to do a great job, Union in 1917, if we would have reached utopia, well, they're perfect. Then you're not. Right? So we have human nature and set up a government to protect the individual sovereignty and individual liberty of our established a government to subjugate them.
Yeah,
I've
lost me for
are
1
we on?
second. The
I was
answer
like,
was so
suddenly we
great.
lost everybody.
Zoom shut down. All right, back on. There's a for the listeners out there, there's a storm here where we're broadcasting from. So, but we are weathering it with Jay's great commentary. So I had heard most of it, but I didn't catch the very end of what you said. Could you just maybe repeat just the very end of what you said? Sorry.
Sure. I think that our governance system acknowledges the fallibility of each of us and the propensity of human beings to gather power to themselves, and at least some of us to abuse it when we have it. And so our system is set up in acknowledgement of that human nature and to protect the individual against those type of abuses. Whereas in the Communist Manifesto and in the Soviet Union and North Korea and Cuba, the power is invested in a few individuals and they have absolute power. And so abuse follows. Even if you had like the most wonderful leader, eventually that person is going to leave, be gone, die.
And that's so interesting because of what Janine said as well, because we acknowledge that we're do a process built into that a more perfect union. And I may have frozen again, hopefully not. But I do think, I think that you've definitely wrapped up so much of Constituting America's mission today, in which you've said up so far. And these pieces are a lot of these pieces where we try to talk to students about. We do the student program. So it's really great to have this on a podcast as well. So my time is up. Thank you very much. I'll pass on to Wyatt.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jewel, and thank you, Jay, for being here. Also, thank you for your service, not only to our country, but to the organization as well. So definitely wanted to get a shout out to you for that. I got to say, yeah, I read your essay, and first off, you started talking about baseball. And I mean, that really resonated with me. We're a big baseball family, although we root for the Cardinals, but I mean, still. It was, like I said, it was great. And I really liked your comparison with the Communist Manifesto. I mean, we obviously learned about it in school, but we didn't go in depth about, well, what made it different, especially when compared to our founding documents. And so I wanted to ask one question first. How does recognizing our faults and issues, because Communist Manifesto does point out some issues in society, and I mean, we're obviously not perfect. No one is, no nation is. But how does recognizing our faults and issues as a nation help further this idea of American exceptionalism?
Yes, that's a great question. Thanks, Wyatt. And I will say on the baseball thing, I really love to put that in the essay. The 1969 Miracle Mets was one of my first memories. I was 6 years old at the time, and it was really based on a very positive vision that a new manager brought to the team, that they could go from last place to be champion. So
Yeah.
it was fun. But on to your question, yeah, I think our system acknowledges that even today, at this point in our history, we are far from perfect. And one of the reasons people push back on this notion of exceptionalism is that they confuse those terms, perfect with exceptional, or superior with exceptional, or better than everybody else with exceptional. As I mentioned earlier, we're not making that claim. We still don't make that claim. We're not the perfect union, or it wouldn't be in our documents that we were pursuing a more perfect union. You can't be more perfect than perfect. So obviously we acknowledge we're not. And our entire system of the amendment process, the laws that we pass through the legislature, is oriented on improvement. And I mentioned this little phrase before. I think it's a very important phrase in our history. It's progress, not perfection. One of the programs that Constituting America had in the past was one of the ones where how to have a civil conversation with other people. I think it's important to keep that in mind. If you aim at the right thing, you will do the right things to get there. And so as we can have unity in where we aim, which is a more perfect union, we can have civil conversations with people who disagree with us on the specifics of how we get there, because everyone has a shared goal to create a more perfect union, to provide for the common defense, promote the general wealth, all those things that are in our mission statement. And that's what allows us to progress. That's how come we can get better over time. We don't rely on one person's vision or the force of government to take us there. It's the people who we, the people, who are the sovereign, we come together in unity and figure out how we aim in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And then whenever I was kind of reading yours too, you're talking about the Communist Manifesto, where they said it was us versus them, and then they have to have a violent revolution in order to achieve that utopia. Whereas with us, we were built on compromise. I mean, we had a bunch of compromises, talking about like the Great Compromise with the bicameral and unicameral legislature. That was definitely an important part for us too, was compromise. Moving on to my next question. In your essay, you also talked about some of our influences. So these, our founding fathers were readers of important philosophers such as Locke and Montesquieu, as well as important documents like the Magna Carta. So how did these philosophers and documents influence the framers' vision of government and how it would create our own nation?
Yeah, well, it was very important in the creation of just the idea of the state, that our founders were steeped deeply, way more than I am, and I'm embarrassed at the level of knowledge that they had of Locke and Coke's Institutes of the Law of England, and John Locke's two treatises of government, which they base a lot of the purpose of government on, and Montesquieu and how the government should be arranged. They looked at the great works of philosophy and governance that had gone on for hundreds of years. I mean, the Magna Carta was 1215, right? So they were very, very steeped in the Greeks and the philosophers, and they took that and put that into action. I think it's important. I know there's a lot of students on the line, and that's a very, very important point that I hope came through in my essay, is that there's a lot of wisdom in the past, and it's important to inculcate that into your own views on the future, because we don't know everything when we're born, and we can learn a lot from people who came before. And our founders definitely did that. And then you can progress from there. So we're constantly building and improving upon what has been laid before us. Whereas in the Communist Manifesto, the idea, we had to smash everything that came in the past. We have to reject everything. It's a capitalist society, and it's all corrupt, and we just have to crush it. And you can see that sometimes, whether it's communist or other revolutionary movements in society today, a real lack of respect for the wisdom of the past, whereas our founders had great respect and knowledge about that. So I ask students, please study, because there's a lot of great wisdom out there that you build upon. You're not saying John Locke was perfectly right, but John Locke was an amazing philosopher who said, really, this is the purpose of government. The purpose of government is three things, right? It's reflected right in our document, right? We have to secure the people and provide a way for them to have disputes and solve disputes. And then we need to protect ourselves from foreign invasion. Those are the three purposes of government. That's what John Locke said. Well, we take that and we expand that. Okay, well, how do we do that? Montesquieu, this is how you do the checks and balances across the different branches of government to make sure that nobody becomes too powerful for one branch. Okay, great. Let's adopt that. And then we put it into practice. So it's very, very important that they knew these great texts and this great work that had been done prior. And it's important that we continue to study the wisdom of the past.
Oh yeah, very, especially as a history geek and history nerd. I mean, like I said, history education major. It's definitely history provides a great lesson. Some of the benefits, and then some of the mistakes of the past, we take from that and we learn from it and we build off of it. And I also want to give a shout out to the winners trip. We go to the past couple years. We've gone to the Victims of Communism Museum in D.C. And I got to say it's tucked away. I mean, it's probably not, like as mainstream as the Smithsonian museums, but it is fascinating talking about all the atrocities that happened under communist governments and talking about their history that, in those nations they try to erase, they don't want to talk about. But moving on from that, my last question is American exceptionalism. You were talking about how some people are kind of turned away from that term. I know in one of my history classes, we were talking about it, and some of the students, they didn't want to talk about it as much, or they didn't want to acknowledge of this American exceptionalism. But what role does it have in today's society, as well as our kind of motto or helping us formulate policy?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier why I think that people have this, strange view of the statement that we're an exceptional nation, because it's obvious that we were and are, because of the changes that we brought to all of the world, through this idea of individual liberty and all men are created equal, spread across a large nation. This was unique. And exceptionalism means different, as I mentioned earlier. It doesn't mean better, right? It means different in a good way. So to your question, so why is that important? We need to keep that in mind because we want to continue to be different in a positive way. We want to look at societies around the world that are not functioning well as our own, and see where we are not functioning well, and be different in a positive way to improve upon that, to make that better, to continually strive, as I mentioned, that aim that we take. Humans are aiming animals. We have to go towards something. And if we say that we're going towards a higher goal, a better objective, progress, not perfection, but progress towards a better goal, then we'll work together to get there. If we can have that vision and share it. So we want to maintain that we are an exceptional nation, that we fight, we work hard for the liberties of men and women, for freedom, for peace around the world. We want to be that nation because that's the right aim. And if we have the right aim, we'll do the right things.
Yeah, that's so very true. And I can't reemphasize your point enough of the American exceptionalism is meaning different in a good way rather than better or even superior, because I think a lot of people have that common misconception of that. So, well, thank you so much for telling us all about this and, just giving us your wisdom. I will pass it back over to Kathy. So thank you so
Thanks,
much, Jay.
Wyatt. Good to see you.
Good seeing you.
Hey,
Well,
Kathy,
yeah.
I just wanted to step in there with talking about history and how important history is. That are what both Jay and Wyatt are saying. And Wyatt, you're not going to maybe be a history professor. You're going to be a history professor. You always like hopes to someday. If that's what you want, Wyatt, you're going to accomplish it. But I just want to say, history holds the key to the future. Is the name of our annual academic study that we have. History holds the key to the future. And as I introduce every single one of them on the podcast, what Shakespeare said, what's past is prologue. So food for thought. I just want to throw that in with our history.
Perfect. Yeah.
And Jay, you're amazing, and Wyatt, you are too, and Jewel and Jorn. But I just gosh, we need you out there on the speaker circuit, Jay, and as a national pundit. What you have to say is amazing. Okay, we got to make that happen, Kathy. We have to make that happen, Kathy.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you, Wyatt and Janine and Jewel. And before we go to audience questions, Jorn, I think, why don't you play a clip from the interview that Janine did with Jay?
I really respond to what you just said about a more perfect union. Mm-hmm. Just say that one more time, because I think it was really good.
Yes. So there was no
expectation. We didn't say we were a perfect union.
No, there was no claim to that. Mm-hmm. And I believe some people can sometimes be cynical and say the United States had this problem and that problem, and we certainly did. We had slavery, we had women's rights issues, we had treatment of foreigners that was certainly not perfect, right?
Native American rights.
Lots, yeah, of course. Yeah. Lots of other things. Mm-hmm. Lots of other things.
Yeah, right.
Right. But there was no claim at the time of our founding that we were a perfect union. Mm-hmm. What there was a vision that we would create a more perfect union, which talks to progress, not perfection. And that's a really important concept. But if you look at it cynically, you could say, oh, well, we had slavery, so therefore the entire American experiment is a lie. Well, that's not true, right? Because we did make progress. We absolutely did make progress. Compare that again to the communist vision. What was the result of that? You go down the street here in Washington, D.C. to the Museum of Communism, and you'll see 100 million dead. In 100 years. What was the result of our vision? The spreading of this notion around the world that all men are created equal. It was not a concept widely accepted in 1776. Mm-hmm. It is a concept widely accepted today. How come? Well, not fully, not 100%, but largely because of the United States and the vision and mission set forth in our founding documents, which spread around the world.
Well, and we encourage everybody to go on our website and watch the whole interview. We've dropped links to the interview in the Q&A, so it makes it easy for people to access it. And it's just a really great interview. So we're going to before we go to some audience questions, though, we want to give a shout out to Wayne McCurdy, who is a teacher watching with 110 students today. So Wayne, thank you for being on. Thank you to all your students. And if you are a teacher with students watching in the classroom, just drop us a note in the Q&A and we'll give you a shout out as well. We also want to thank our listeners with Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM on the radio dial. KKVV in Las Vegas airs Constituting America's Constitutional Chats on Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific. So thank you to those listening in Las Vegas. So, Jay, we've got some great audience questions and comments. And I think, let's see, we will start with, well, Rick Mayberry just says, wow, 250 episodes, rich history of service to learners in our country. Thank you. And thank you to Rick for being a loyal listener. Rick, you're on quite frequently. We appreciate you. Rick also says Jay has the perfect definition of exceptionalism and understanding the story behind the story. Too often, the concept and meaning of American exceptionalism is corrupted because of political motivations. His presentation needs to be part of every citizen's education, and let's start with Congress. So thank you for that as well, Rick. Now, Sandy Thatcher, when you were talking about the ideal parts of communism, Sandy Thatcher asks about the third stage of communism, which is supposed to be the withering away of the state. And he says, but you need to acknowledge that Marx talked about a third stage of communism, the withering away of the state. The problem was that real communism never got to the third stage and remained at the stage where the state had all the power. Would you want to address that?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to say earlier, I just never got to, is we have to remember that Marx really was working in the context of an economic system. He was against capitalism as an economic system, and he wanted to implement a communist system, which was more of an economic system. And this utopian notion that the melting away of the state, which I did mention earlier, was the goal. It is aspirational in that regard. In my opinion, I think that was a utopian goal. But some people can say that, that was where they were going. They just never got there. And that's true, because his view was that if we could do away with the capitalist aspects where one class, it was very much a class warfare context, one class dominated the other by the accumulation of capital and basically enslaved others as workers. If we could get rid of that, then we could have a society where it wasn't necessary to have a powerful state anymore. Of course, the goal was, the method was use the powerful state in the interim to take us there, and we never got out of it. That's absolutely true. I would argue, and this is just my opinion, that the concept was flawed at the get-go because you will never get out of that last state to that third stage of communism, the communism of the utopia, because people won't do it. If you give people absolute power, they're not going to turn it back over. But that would be my argument on why we didn't get there. No society has ever gotten there, and I would say the probability is very low that anyone ever would.
Well, thank you. And Andrew Christovich just wrote here that Mr. C's class in Jacksonville, Florida, watching with 30 students at Stanton College Prep. So thank you, Mr. C, for having your students at Stanton College Prep tune in. And then Eric Braverman, I'm just going to drop this into the chat, but Dr. Eric Braverman has just given us a great way to memorize the preamble. He numbers the main points in the preamble 1 through 14. So we'll drop that into the chat here in just a minute. And then let's see, Julianne Smith asks, if Marx were alive today, how would he view the attempts countries have made to become communist? Would he think they did it wrong and therefore failed, or that in reality his vision didn't work?
That's a great question. I've taken a guess. I've never actually thought of that before. So just winging it right here on a podcast, I'd say, I think that Marx would be disappointed as to your last questioner, which was a great point, that they never really fulfilled the objective. They never got out of the power stage. And it's also important to remember that Marx didn't think like the Soviet Union was going to be the place, or Russia would be the place where communism would result. He was looking at industrial societies like England and the United States, Germany. And he thought they would pass through these stages and get rid of this oppression of the classes. And he would have to be disappointed that no one ever merged out of the interim violent stage that he acknowledged in the manifesto that had to be there. No one ever emerged from that. So yeah, I think he'd be very disappointed and would have to be.
And then Julianne also asked another interesting question. How do you think the founding fathers would reply to Marx?
Well, one of the things we mentioned a few times, God, I think that the founding fathers acknowledged, most of them, almost all of them, were steeped in the Bible and Christian traditions, religious traditions of all sorts, by the way. And they acknowledged that there was a power higher than government or man. And they would have picked that out right away as a despotic concept that would lead to tyranny. I don't claim to be anywhere near as smart as Madison, for example. He would have seen through that right away. And they would have saying, you're setting up a system that is giving all the power to the central authority. Remember, they were also very steeped in monarchy, the rights of kings to do whatever they wanted. And that was one of the main reasons for our revolution. So they would have seen that as just kind of maybe a new version of the same old thing.
Thank you. And Rick Mayberry says, essentially, isn't communism and its foundational manifesto principle, the few knew more than the many and must be led by the few? Okay, he's saying, isn't that communism's foundational principle, that the few knew more than the many and must be led by the few, whereas American democracy is the many know more than the few, and the few must be led by the many. Rick says this ensures that leadership should always be accountable to those to the led.
Yeah, I would just say, just take two phrases and put them next to each other. We the people and the vanguard of the proletariat, right? We the people is our concept. It's us. It's the populace. We're sovereign. The vanguard of the proletariat is the few. They're going to drag everybody else towards utopia, and they're going to do it by force. That's kind of the essential comparison between the two visions.
That's a great way to boil it down. And then one other question from Julianne Smith, asking if Marx specifically addressed anything against the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution in his manifesto. And I know you read it. I mean, do you recall anything on that?
I don't, and I brought my Marx today, so it's interesting. Like, this is Marx and this is the manifesto, it's like this little bit at the end. So he may have. I'm just not scholarly enough to know whether he ever addressed that.
Okay. And then Terrence Durbin says, the Germans had National Socialism and the Italians had fascism. How about these people that espouse socialism these days? Are they all students of Marx?
Well, I think, it's a very big subject. What's the difference between fascism, Marxism, socialism, communism? There's a lot of isms. I like to boil it down, and people can disagree, to how much control do you give to the government and how much control do the people maintain? Somewhere along a continuum between anarchy on one side and monarchy and tyranny and dictatorship on another, you want to end up, right? And so how much control do the people have in our system? You want to have the most possible. And in those other systems, whether it's fascism, communism, Marxism, or monarchy, a military dictatorship, the people's power is diminished. And that's really the spectrum that we're operating in. So to me, honestly, they're really almost all the same because they put all the power in the state. And they've got little technical differences, but they're pretty much all the same.
Well, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour. And Jay, just as Janine said, we are just so blessed to have you on our board. And we thank you for your leadership and all the ways that you contribute to all of Constituting America's programs, and just the wisdom that you bring and the wisdom that you brought to today's podcast. So thank you so much for being with us. And we want to thank our listeners for being with us today and remind everyone to come back next week. Third time's a charm. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, will be with us next Tuesday, April 22nd. So we hope to see y'all all back next week. Any parting words?
Oh, well, Jay, thank you. It's Janine and Wyatt and Jewel and Jorn and Kathy, everybody, and our audience. Great questions.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Wait, I think Jay wants to say something, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I just
Jay.
want to say thanks to Constituting America. You guys do an amazing job. You give all the credit to people like me. It's the people like you in the organization who do it all, and it's amazing. And thank you. I also want to shout out to my buddy Tim. Thanks for sponsoring the podcast.
Yes. Thank you to Tim.
Thank
Thank
you
y'all. Okay, thanks. Bye.